Hello, my name is Unsung and welcome to my Samira guide. Before we begin the guide, I'd like to introduce myself. I have been high elo since Season 5 and in Season 9 I peaked Challenger rank 14 in North America. As of Season 12, I am statistically the best Samira in an A. Now, that's enough about me, let's go ahead and get right into this guide. Starting off with Samira's runes. Samira is hardlocked into taking the precision tree for Conqueror. This rune provides the two most important things that you could ever want on Samira, attack damage and lifesteal. Samira's base damages quite literally do not exist on a few of her skills, so this means that all of your damage comes from either items or runes, especially in the early game. Conqueror gives you that much needed oomph and allows you to blow up your enemies quickly and stylishly. Samira stacks this rune incredibly fast, so you're able to make more out of it than most other champions. Samira's Auto Q Auto basic attack trade grants you 4 stacks of Conqueror. These 4 stacks can very easily be converted into 12 with simple spell waving, allowing you to max out your stacks incredibly quickly while giving you the most amount of damage from your abilities. The most common all-in will consist of Auto, Q, Auto, E, Auto, W, land both parts, Auto, Q, R. This very easily grants you 12 stacks of Conqueror and will give you tons of damage and vamp over the course of a skirmish or a slow-paced teamfight. This is just an example combo, and I will be giving you full combos at a later point in this video, so make sure that you stay tuned for that. Triumph is the second most valuable rune for Samira. This rune grants you healing on takedown for 10% of your missing health and also bonus gold. Snowball champions love extra healing and bonus gold. Run this rune on Samira every single game. It's also not uncommon to have anywhere from 2 to 5 Triumph procs per fight if you play it correctly. 50% of your missing health is a pretty big deal when you have literally zero range. Riot buffed Samira in patch 11.24 and removed the mana cost from her ultimate, which makes Presence of Mind basically useless on her, and Overheal is a scaling rune which we despise around here. Overheal simply takes too long to come online and should be ignored completely. Legend Bloodline is the next best rune in this tree for the sheer effective stats that it gives Samira. You can run Legend Tenacity if the enemy team consists of something like Scion, Sejuani, Cho'Gath, Ashe, Lux, but you generally want to stay away from this rune as much as you can. Bloodline is simply too strong on Samira, and if you snowball hard enough, CC doesn't really matter as long as you play well. Last Stand and Coup de Grace are both amazing on Samira. However, the bonuses from Last Stand are going to be active for far much longer as Samira has such short range. I personally recommend going Last Stand every game as the bonuses are far more significant than the ones granted by Coup de Grace, and it allows for clutch plays. Our secondary rune tree is where we are allowed to have some variation. Domination Secondary for Eyeball Collection and Treasure Hunter is the most common and most effective page. There is a reason for this. Eyeball Collection grants you 18 AD, or almost 2 longswords worth of stats when it is fully stacked. This rune only requires 10 takedowns, which really isn't that much for a champion like Samira who has resets and a lot of AoE damage. It takes Gathering Storm 30 full minutes to outscale Eyeball Collection's attack damage and max stacks, and if you're unable to get 10 stacks of Eyeball Collection by 30 minutes, it probably wasn't a good game to pick Samira. For this reason, this rune is nearly best in slot on this champion, and when paired with the extra gold generation from Treasure Hunter, you hit power spikes much sooner, which allows you to snowball even harder. And remember, snowball is the name of the game. This is my most used page on Samira post durability update, as snowballing early is that much more important since the durability patch gives rear loaded stats. The quicker that you're able to get your items, the less likely the game is to hit late game. Our other secondary page is going to be Resolve Secondary for Conditioning and Revitalize. Conditioning gives around 1200 gold worth of stats at 12 minutes, but you effectively do not have a rune until then. This is the most gold efficient route, but also has the weakest early game. Revitalize and Overgrowth both take time to scale as well, meaning that if you lose pre-12 minutes on this page, it's really hard to come back. However, this page is really strong into Enchanter lanes that don't have much pressure against you. Revitalize and Overgrowth both provide an insane amount of stats if you're able to stack them up. Revitalize is worse after 1210, Overgrowth is better after 1210. The alternative rune to take to Conditioning is Bone Plating. Bone Plating is best in slot against champions like Alistar, Nautilus, and Leona as they have zero poke to proc it, and it directly blocks most of the damage in their combos. If the enemy team has Alistar and Tristana, go Bone Plating every single time, just make sure that it doesn't get popped by an auto attack. If the enemy team has a huge amount of CC, Unflinching is also a viable option in this tree. Unflinching is hands down better than taking Legend Tenacity. Bone Plating plus Unflinching will prevent you from being blown up and perma-CC'd at the same time. Just know that taking Resolve Tree gives you literally zero damage, so you're forced to play a little bit more safely in the early game, or else you'll fall really far behind. Our last secondary page is going to be Sorcery for Nimbus Cloak and Gathering Storm. Only take this page if you're going cleanse and the enemy team has CC that you cannot dodge or outplay, such as Lissandra R, Braum auto attacks for his passive, or a Leona Q, stuff like that. This is very effective against lanes that frequently run exhaust like Jhin as well, or things like Viger that have huge AoE stuns. For summoner spells, Flash is a must so you can assassinate anyone that steps out of position to get yourself rolling. Exhaust is hands down the best summoner spell for snowballing yourself and keeping yourself safe out of lane. This summoner really does do it all. It slows people so you can ramp damage on them if they take a bad trade, allows you to counter-assassinate assassins with the damage reduction, and turns you into one of the most oppressive duelist champions in the entire game as far as marksman 1v1s go. Samira's issue is getting to someone, not killing someone when she's in. When you're already in on somebody and you can stay in, you're really strong. Exhaust helps you get in and stay in without having to be constantly afraid of somebody blowing you up. Cleanse is also really good for removing targetable CC like Leona Q, and for removing exhaust from yourself. You can also cleanse the damage over time from Ignite, meaning that you essentially have a stronger heal when you use it appropriately. Heal is actually pretty bad on Samira since this is mostly a defensive summoner spell on a very aggressive champion, and the cooldown is simply too long for you to use it aggressively and press a lead. My favorite summoner is Exhaust, but I want you to try both Cleanse and Heal and see if they might fit your playstyle more. We won't play the same, and that's okay. Now that we talked about summoner spells, let's go ahead and talk about starting items. There are two main starts that we're going to be taking as Samira: Longsword and 3 potions, and Dorans Blade with 1 potion. There are pros and cons to both of these starts, so let's go ahead and break them down so you can decide what you want to be taking. Starting off with Longsword, some of the pros include increased sustain, quicker scaling, and higher damage. Dorans Blade gives you percentage Omnivamp, right? It's 2.5% total Omnivamp. Omnivamp doesn't currently function with Samira's ultimate aside from Conquer because it's a unique form of Omnivamp, so this really doesn't give you that much actual lifesteal. In order to get the equal amount of sustain from 2 potions with Dorans Blade, you would have to auto somewhere in the ballpark of 100 times. This is kind of ridiculous. So Longsword actually gives you far more sustain than Dorans Blade could even hope to. Quicker scaling is also very important because this allows us to buy our power spikes earlier. If you are a fan of Serrated Dirk early game, then this of course is 350 gold off this price tag, which means that on your first base it's 750 gold, which is easily obtainable compared to 1300 or 1100 gold, right? On our first base with Noon Quiver, it's the same story. We have a much cheaper first buy than we do if we have D-Blade. If we go and we look at D-Blade right here, it costs 450 gold, and the sellback price of D-Blade is substantially less than Longsword. Currently, the sellback price for D-Blade is 180 gold. You spend 450 gold to sell it later on to get 180 gold back. With Longsword, we have a net gold gain here, and this is an item that we never sell. This always builds into other items, so we get quicker scaling due to that. And also, when we go and look at Longsword, Longsword gives 10 AD, Dorans Blade gives 8 AD. This is a 2 damage difference, which doesn't really sound like much, but that really adds up if you're able to get in and actually go into a fight. 2 AD on all of your abilities is equal to like 30 damage to 40 damage over the course of a fight. This actually really adds up, especially on a champion like Samira who doesn't have base damage. She literally has 0 damage on her Q at rank 1, and her ultimate only has a base damage of 5. So every point of bonus AD that you get is very, very important. Now, in terms of cons, Longsword is straight up weaker to all in every single way than Dorans Blade. D-Blade does have 80 extra HP, and 80 extra HP when paired with your effective health is quite substantial in the early game. You also lack lifesteal until you get Vamp Scepter with this start. By the time that lifesteal from D-Blade is effective, you'll already have other items or have sold it by that point in the game. D-Blade is far stronger for all-ins at basically every stage of the game. D-Blade gives you a lot of effective health. It makes you very tanky in the early game where Samira is very, very weak. She is one of the weakest level 1s in the game, and it does give you Omnivamp if you hold on to it. However, once again, it's not worth as much for the economy. If the fight fails in the early game, you're actually set behind by buying a Dorans Blade, and it has weaker sustain overall than the potions from Longsword 3. So basically, too long didn't read. Longsword is way better for sustain, Dorans Blade is way better for early game fighting. Longsword scales much harder, and Dorans Blade scales a okay amount depending on how long you're going to be holding on to it. Take Longsword in about 70 to 80% of your games, and then Dorans Blade when you're against things such as Leona and Tristana that you can't really avoid the burst, because most trades post durability update are actually not going to result in kills unless you decide that you want to go for a kill yourself. Now that we talked about our starting items, let's go ahead and head over to itemization as a whole. Samira's itemization is limited compared to other champions because A, she has crit scaling, and B, she is very feast or famine. You're either super ahead and able to buy any item in the world, or you have no gold whatsoever and you sit on components for the majority of the game. Because of this, post 12.10 build variety has hit an all-time low, and items such as Eclipse or Gale Force are even more situational than they already were. We only really have 2 strong mythics. So we're going to be covering 4 primary build paths using these 2 strong mythics. Our first build is going to be Immortal Shield Bow, Finish Boots, and then Collector. This is really good for snowballing in the early game. Our second build is going to be Immortal Shield Bow, Finish Boots, and then Lord Dominic's Regards. Very good against multi-tank teams. Our third build is going to be Immortal Shield Bow, Finish Boots, and then Bloodthirster. Also good against multi-tank teams, but for when you need the armor penetration later. And our fourth build is going to be Gale Force, Boots, and Maw of Malmortius. Remember, Immortal Shield Bow and Maw of Malmortius share the same lifeline passive, meaning that you can't build both of these items at the same time. In order to forego the lifeline on Immortal Shield Bow, for the magic damage shield that we have on Maw of Malmortius, we'll actually skip going Immortal Shield Bow completely and replace it with Gale Force and then go Boots of our choice with Maw. This means that we can get a lot more effective HP and a larger shield against magic damage if we're against a 4 or 5 AP team. Shield Bow provides a close range AD carry with lifesteal, a massive shield, and then extra AD when the passive actually does get popped. Gale Force, on the other hand, allows you to build Maw and gives you additional burst, a way to dodge important skills or a way to go in. This is a very versatile item. As far as boots go, plated steel caps are hands down the best. However, Mercury treads are also viable as a situational pick. Steel caps grant you mitigation from the armor that is stock on the boots, as well as the 12% reduction against any and all auto attacks. Even mages auto attack in their combos, making these boots incredibly efficient. Since Samira's range is an average 100 shorter than most meta picks at any given time, you're going to be starting most fights 1 auto attack down in terms of HP, and steel caps kind of remove some of this handicap. Merc treads are strong when paired with unflinching, but magic resist boots will not make you nearly as tanky as plated steel caps do. Against AD champions, the percent reduction that you get from steel caps is so much more significant than what you get from Merc treads. Merc treads are, however, good at getting you out of crowd control that would result in more damage. So it's really up to you. If you're against a very heavy CC team that has a lot of magic damage, then definitely go Merc treads. But if there is very heavy AD threats on the enemy team or they auto attack a lot, definitely go steel caps in the majority of your game. Most of the time in League of Legends, you itemize for your lane opponent. Samira doesn't really lane against mages too much, and when you do lane against mages, there's generally going to be an AD mid or an AD top as well. So steel caps are generally what I buy in like 90% of my games. Collector at its core is a weak item. However, the stats that this item provide are incredibly important to Samira specifically. Lots of AD for your terrible base damage, crit chance for your crit scaling, and lethality for snowballing those really important early game leads. Samira is one of the best users of a weak item due to the way that her passive and ulti interact with the execution passive that Collector has. Death and Taxes causes damage that would leave a champ below 5% of their max HP to instead be executed, and grant you 25 extra gold. This passive applies on red buff, the multiple shots from Samira's passive since the damage doesn't happen all at once, and to each and every single one of Samira's R ticks. Samira gets more opportunities to execute champions than basically any other Collector user, and when she has resets built into her E, this makes it a very strong buy. On the other end of the spectrum, we have LDR. This is everything that Collector isn't. The build path is bad, but the completed item is among one of the best in the game for AD champions. This is due to the sheer amount of value that all AD champions get from percentage armor penetration, and the fact that this item only scales better as the game goes on. For Samira, however, you sacrifice a lot of snowball potential buying this item, and I only really build this personally when it's completely necessary. If the enemy team has a tank jungle and tank support that you absolutely need to hit before diving into a fight, then LDR might be better than the Collector. If you have both of these champions 0-5 by the time that you're team fighting, Collector is better because they don't have time to get armor, which means they don't have time to scale, so they don't have time to tank your damage. LDR simply does not offer enough AD to make up for Samira's lack of base damages, making this a really strong fourth item and a weaker second or third item, depending on your build path. Bloodthirster is a decent second item if the enemy team is very low range, or if you want to turn into more of a drain tank. Building this second allows for IE third and then LDR fourth, making you into an absolute menace if you're allowed to scale to this point. This is the best in slot item to build against low damage Enchanter comps or DPS reliant AD carries. This is also the preferred build to go against tanks. Infinity Edge is a must-buy as a third item on Samira. This allows you to play like more of an assassin and actually turn into a damage threat. Once you buy IE, you can steamroll basically any and all teams as soon as you complete it. My personal favorite 6-item Samira build generally looks like Immortal Shieldbow, Plated Steel Caps, Collector, Infinity Edge, Bloodthirster, Guardian Angel. Now that we talked about our core items, let's go ahead and talk about situational items. Guardian Angel is a fantastic defensive item as it gives armor and AD as well as the revive. Force of Nature is the best magic resist item against magic damage DPS or very heavy burst because it does reduce all incoming magic damage with its passive. Spirit Visage is a great item if you drafted Samira with heavy healing allies, lots of shielding, and you build a Bloodthirster. Randuin's Omen is fantastic against crit assassins or low range AD carries. And the same thing with Frozen Heart. Frozen Heart is generally less effective than Randuin's because as an AD carry you don't build much effective HP, and thus you get less results from this than you do with Randuin's, which has both armor and hit points, versus the armor and mana that you get from Frozen Heart. You can also make a case for Black Cleaver, however the stats from other items are usually just better. A situational build against heavy magic damage could be Gale Force, Merc Treads, Maw of Mortius, Bloodthirster, Infinity Edge, Force of Nature. A heavy anti-AD build could consist of Immortal Shieldbow, Plated Steel Caps, Bloodthirster, Infinity Edge, Randuin's Omen, Guardian Angel. And an anti-tank build could be Immortal Shieldbow, Plated Steel Caps, Lord Dominic's Regards, Infinity Edge, Black Cleaver, Bloodthirster, or Guardian Angel. As you can see, you can choose to go for other builds if you desire, they just usually aren't effective as full glass cannon. But sometimes dodging everything and playing perfectly are just too much effort, so these itemizations allow you to brawl and make mistakes without actually dying instantly. Nobody plays 100% perfect all the time. Nobody is going to be, we're not robots, we're simply human. So I do personally recommend going these defensive items, especially if you're newer to Samira. At the end of the day, it's up to you to choose what you want to build. I'm just here to explain when and why to buy certain things, while you decide for yourself if you want to use them. Now that we've covered itemization, let's go ahead and get right into matchups. The most common question I get on stream or in DMs is, what do you do if you have an Enchanter support? When you play with an Enchanter, it's really important that you know the spikes of both your support and the enemy champions in the lane. This is already very important for bot lane, but doubly more so when you play with an Enchanter support. So when you play with an Enchanter, it's really important that you play more passively than normal. You're not allowed to take most of the fights that you would be able to take, but most Enchanter supports are actually quite bad in how they play the lane. If you're playing Samira with an Enchanter against an Enchanter, wait for the enemy Enchanter or AD carry to use an important cooldown, then you can go for a trade, and then equalize the lane with the Enchanter's shielding or healing. If you do enough repetitions of this, eventually you will have your opponent around 60% HP, and then you can force an all-in and kill them guaranteed, even if it's 1v2. Playing the Enchanter lane is basically just playing incredibly patient, and then learning how to adapt from there. So make sure that you know your matchups in the bot lane, and if you have any questions, you can always come and ask me on stream. Samira is probably the most support-reliant marksman in the entire game, and if you don't have a support that allows you to go ham with them, she's honestly not that great of a pick. However, we are troopers out here, and who doesn't love a bit of pain once in a while? Your playstyle will have to shift to a more passive one, which generally means farming until level 3 and giving up any and all priority. If you can't trade after that, you have to wait until 6. The best supports with Samira, in my opinion, are Rel, Nautilus, and Leona in order. I personally hate playing the Renata Samira lane, but other Samira mains really like it. The worst supports that you can get with Samira are going to be Soraka, Yuumi, and Karma. Every other allied support is just kind of These are just the standouts from best to worst. Now let's go to enemy matchups. The champions that will give you the worst times are the ones that deal consistent damage safely. Kalista, Ashe, Caitlyn, Jinx, and Kai'Sa are among some of the worst matchups for Samira. Kalista kites you and dodges your E and Q, which prevent you from stacking style. Ashe doesn't have to use her R until you're on top of her, which is nearly impossible thanks to the permaslow from 600 range. Caitlyn's massive range and wave shoving make any matchup without Heart Engage unplayable, much more so if she has a passive Enchanter support to peel you. Jinx cannot be outshoved by Samira at any point in the game. Samira has one of the worst level 1s in the entire game as well, while Jinx has some of the best level 1 wave clear in the game. Kai'Sa does the same thing that Jinx does, while also being a massive threat. Kai'Sa's Q executes minions under a certain threshold, making her basically impossible to outshove. Playing Samira into any support with hard targetable CC like Leona, Nott, and Braum, or Lulu, is also incredibly painful. These champs can hold onto their crowd control and make your life hell if you don't want to wait for them to use it on someone else. Do not go in if these champions have cooldowns ready for you, and definitely do not R until they use them. Now that we talked about matchups, let's go ahead and move on to the early game. Samira's level 1 is trash. Her Q literally has no base damage, she cannot pressure minion waves like most other champions, she has no range, but you should still try your best to contest the level 2. If you get level 2 first, then you can look for a quick trade, but you usually do not want to all-in at level 2 post 12.10. Trade your opponents until level 3 and then finish them off with a quick and decisive fight, then that is when you hyper snowball with your longsword buy. If this doesn't work out, let the enemy push the wave into you while you thin it constantly with your Q and safe auto attacks, so that way you can then CS under tower until first base. Remember, your HP is also a resource. Don't be too concerned if you eat too many autos, especially if the enemy AD carry has a Dorans Blade into you, you have more sustain than them. Once you get a second longsword or on your first base with D-Blade, you can generally last hit under tower using your melee auto attacks thanks to the added magic damage from the sword. And then you can look for a fight when the lane resets to neutral. Some games you're going to be bouncing waves over and over, so it's really important to learn how to slow push from your tower and keep yourself safe. Slow pushing is simply just letting a wave build up on your side and still only passively last hitting creeps until your wave becomes double or triple its size, so you can then walk it into the enemy's tower. Having such a massive wave prevents your opponents from actually killing you, as they'll take too much damage from minions, and they also have to thin it themselves. Samira's early game is all about mitigating your weaknesses until about level 3, and then it's all about chopping gamers up once you get an additional longsword or a favorable all-in. Post 6, constantly look for all-ins, as Samira's ulti doesn't actually have a cooldown, so even if you lose the first fight of the lane, you can usually force while your opponents have ultis on CD and pull out a win. This is really important in those Enchanter lanes. Ping your allies to let them know when you can and cannot go in, and coax and engage out of them. Communication is key for this champion, as one bad fight can lose you a game very easily. All risk, high reward, baby. For teamfighting, always look for those that are weak and vulnerable. Getting a reset is basically the most important thing on Samira after staying alive. If you're dead, you can't deal any damage, right? Stack your style with autos and Qs whenever they're safe, and then let hell loose when the opponents have to deal with somebody else or they simply forget about you. Save that W for blocking CC or high damage abilities, and if you play it right, you're going to be dropping pentas left and right. If you don't believe me, look at my YouTube uploads, penta every other day. You want to constantly be poking and prodding at enemies until they get pissed and make a mistake. Then, take a nice 900 gold paycheck for their impatience. Calm, cool, composed until you're not. Do not be afraid to go in or take risks on Samira. If you think that you can take the 1v2, go for it, baby. If you lose, respawn, try again. If you win, 600 gold from kills alone and an extra item above your enemies. Failure is inevitable on Samira, so do not be afraid of making mistakes or having a bad fight. Take that risk again, pull it off, make up for it later on. Combo time! Our most commonly used combos are going to be Q, auto, EQ, auto, W ulti, auto Q, auto E, auto W ulti, E, auto Q, auto W, auto ulti, and then E to minion, auto Q, auto W, auto Q ulti. Now we go on to assassination or burst combos. Flash, auto, EQ, auto, W, E again, ulti. Next up, we have Flash, EQ, Auto, W, E again, Auto, R. Our fastest style stack and combo without a reset is going to be Q, Auto, W, EQ, R. Q gives us our first stack of style. Auto gives us our second stack of style. If we're in W range, we can W, EQ for an additional 3 stacks. Each part of W's swing counts as a unique part of your style bar as long as you hit an ability in between. So if you auto attack and then you use your W and then you E, your E will grant you a stack of style, and so will your W2. We can also use auto WEQ, W2 lands, auto ulti if we have no prior shots. These are just some basic combos. Of course, Samira is a champion that is constantly on the move. Don't study these and only go for these combos. Of course, making stuff up on the fly is what is going to make you the most useful, but this is just enough to get you off the ground. Also, it's very important to know that if you R and then you E in your R, Samira will actually auto attack immediately after coming out of her E. She normally does this as well. If we E to a target and we queue up an auto attack, Samira will of course slash them with her sword or shoot them with her gun depending on the range that she's in. If we're in our ultimate, the same thing applies. You'll actually see Samira go ahead and chop this opponent even though she's currently shooting with her ulti. This is very, very, very important for picking people later on into the game and gives you a huge amount of damage. Pay close attention here. Well, I think that about brings our guide to a close. I put a lot of effort into really making this applicable so that we were able to get onto Samira and have a really nice first couple of games on her. She is a very difficult champion in comparison to the majority of the other league champs, as she has a bunch of unique mechanics and a lot of weaknesses that most other champions don't have. So remember, do not be afraid of failure. Everybody fails. It's completely okay. If you're learning, there are going to be growing pains, but Samira will take you far, I promise. This champion is the only champion in the game that still gives me adrenaline rushes. After I've played basically every champ in the game, this is the one that still speaks to me, and I really hope that you guys can feel that same sort of passion that I do. So I can get you started, but it is up to you to actually go ahead and apply all this knowledge yourselves. There are things that I do not cover in the guide that you can come and ask me on stream. If you have any enthusiast questions, you can always come and reach out to me on my stream or through my Discord if I'm not available for whatever reason. But just know that Samira is a hard champion. Do not be afraid of failure, and make sure that you really hype up those successes. This is going to be a really steep learning curve for the majority of people. Don't be put off by it. Make sure that you own it. I just want to say it's not worth giving up the first few times that you fail. If you fail and you fail and you fail, try again until you succeed. If you can't succeed, take a break and then do it again. Every single time somebody's having trouble with Samira and they come and ask me a question, it's usually because they're not confident enough. Once you start building that confidence, I promise that things will get a million times easier for you. So, thank you all for watching. I hope that everybody has a wonderful day. I'll see you guys in the next video.